Pittsburgh Steelers fans, well, it's the third round draft pick. It's come through. You've got your latest draft roundtable. I'd like to welcome my co-hosts, Tony Defeo, Jeremy Betz, Andrew Wilbar. Steelers, another player, might be a great player depending on your view of it. I think I want to go first to Tony. What's your reaction to this pick of DeMarvin Leal, pick number 84 in the third round, a guy that at the start of the draft process, some people had him there in the top 10. Yeah, what's your gut reaction?
Well, after you tell me that, I'm actually pretty excited about it that they got him in the third round, but I don't know a whole lot about him. I do know that the defensive line, they need some depth, and there's still uncertainties about Stephon Tuitt and even Tyson Alualu. So they certainly needed to address the D line at some point with a premium pick. So this sounds like they get potentially a diamond in the rough. I'm not sure. I have to do some more research on him, but it definitely addresses the need.
Yeah, for sure. And there are some questions around the Steelers' defensive line. Jeremy, same question to you. You see them draft DeMarvin Leal. What's the reaction?
Okay, so my initial reaction is this guy is a tweener, the absolute definition of a tweener. He is not a true defensive tackle in size, especially in the 3-4 that the Steelers like to run, but he's not an edge either, a 2-point stance outside linebacker. So to me, it sounds like the Steelers have a plan to make him a versatile defender. Either that or they will specialize him to one part of that. So it's whatever they have the feeling of. Maybe they think they can add weight to him, and he's got the frame for it. I believe you could say that. He's not the most naturally athletic guy, but he's got heavy hands. He's got a big motor, and he's got some finesse to his game that allows him to get after the quarterback and make plays in the backfield.
Yeah, for sure. And, someone with 25 tackles for a loss throughout their college career and 13 sacks, he definitely brings something there in terms of that pass rush. But what about you, Andrew Wilbar? I know you're one of the BTSC's leading blokes when it comes to college football. What's your gut reaction to this pick?
He's a polarizing pick. He was arrested back in December on DUI. He's had some off-field concerns. I didn't expect the Steelers to go this route. I understand the Texas A&M connection. Obviously, the Steelers trust their scouts in the area after taking 2 Texas A&M guys last year, taking another one this year. He's got some talent. Not the most athletic guy in the world, not the most nimble, but he's pretty quick out of his stance. He's good using his hands, has good hand placement. He's a good finisher. Once he does get loose, he is a good finisher, and that I can't say the same about a lot of the other top guys at defensive line in this draft. Had 8.5 sacks this past year. The production's there. He's a good player. I mean, in my first mock draft, I think I may have even had him going in the late first round. But it stings more seeing that the next 2 picks off the board were Marcus Jones, who I had 55 on the big board. He was the guy I was ideally wanting with this pick. And then Malik Willis after that, who, of course, infamously my number 5 player in this entire draft. So that made the pick worse. It's not a terrible pick, but I would have rather seen the Steelers address a bigger need area.
Yeah, so and that's an interesting question because we were talking a lot about cornerback, in the BTSC, Zoom that a lot of us were joining as well, and particularly I know we were talking about that, Jeremy and Andrew and the other player when we talk about the defensive line that's still on the board there was Perrion Winfrey. Now I don't know if he got taken in the subsequent picks, but then you look at that and you look at defensive end and what he might do, and he was that all-star at the Senior Bowl. So it's interesting with those 2 guys on the board. We did go more interior and we focused there. I guess, and I'll start off with you, Tony. Do you see this as we need to get younger? Alualu's probably got 1 year left. Is that where the fix is? Is this a move? We have to stop the run. Like most Steelers fans are sitting there, and what last year was an embarrassment when it comes to rush defense.
Oh yeah, they certainly have to get younger. I think what is Tuitt? He's almost 30, right? And Alualu is going to be 35 in a couple of weeks. And Hayward's 33, so they definitely have to get younger. I mean, this is one of the best defensive lines in the NFL not that long ago. And certainly one of the deepest. And now that took a big hit last year, and they suffered for it. They had the worst rushing defense in the NFL. Is that right? or at least one of the worst. So
Yep.
they had to address this position, this unit at some point, and that's certainly what this is. I mean, they went out and they were aggressive last year. They brought in Loudermilk. They have Wormley on there on that unit, who's certainly a nice, solid veteran, but I don't think he's somebody you can count on in the future to be somebody who's going to take the place of one of these guys permanently. So yeah, they had to address the unit. So I think that's really what this is. I mean, there's so many areas they had to address, and D-line was one of them, and you can't do it all at once. So, so far, three picks, and they haven't really addressed it. That's something I'm looking for later on in this draft. Are they gonna do that? Because with Edmonds, the deal that they gave him, clearly they're not big fans of his, as some of us are. So I'm wondering what they're going to do with that position moving forward the rest of the weekend.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Tony. And so I guess that leads me to my next question, which is, one that I really want to get, from you, Betz and Andrew Wilbar, particularly with your draft pick show as well. The thing that stands out to me right now, across the consistent thing across the 3 picks, and then you particularly see it with Leal, is the Steelers are picking from either a college they really know well in Pitt, or they're picking from top colleges like Georgia and now Texas A&M. And so the thing that I find interesting with Leal, and I'd love to get your thoughts on, is he played for Texas A&M. They played teams like Alabama. Now they beat Alabama this year as well. So, Leal's someone that's played in a defense that's used to having to actually make plays to keep Texas A&M in the game. But, I'd love to get your thoughts on the type of competition that Leal went up against when we're talking about, running backs and the quality of opposition that he played against.
You definitely have to take into consideration that he played in the SEC. That obviously gives him a heads up a head start, I should say, in the preparedness for what the NFL is going to bring. And the SEC is not the NFL either. Don't get me wrong. There's some pushovers there, but I think the fact that he was able to produce steady production across his college career, he never really flashed based on his rankings coming out of high school, but he was a steady performer. He did get a little bit better each year. And I just think he's so versatile. And the Steelers like that in the middle of the draft. Last year it was Kendrick Green, center guard, versatility. You've got so even like later last year when they went after Trey Norwood, Mike Tomlin famously called him the Swiss Army knife, So these guys that maybe are a little bit positionless as far as an actual role, but, they have the versatility to be molded as the coaching staff sees fit. And, to be honest, this isn't bias either. This is well known across the league. What better organization to develop a player than the Pittsburgh Steelers? That's
it. Andrew, what about for you, particularly when we think about, the AFC North right now, the run game that is so required in some of the weather, the way that, the 2 running backs that the Browns have, you've got Dobbins coming back with the Ravens, the Bengals have got Mixon. Is Leal someone that's going to help us stop that run?
I go back to the Alabama game that they played at the beginning of October, and Brian Robinson went off for 150 yards in that game. Texas defensive line struggled. It was on 24 carries, so you're talking over 5 yards a carry. They struggled as the game went on, being able to contain Alabama's running game. And you look at some of his bigger competition. He had 13. I believe he has 13 career sacks. This past season, he had 1.5 sacks against New Mexico, 1 sack against Kent State, 1 sack against Missouri, 1 sack against Prairie View A&M, and 1 sack against he had 1 sack against Ole Miss, and he had 2 against Mississippi State. A lot of his production in terms of pass rush has not come against great competition.
Yeah, and this is where I think, I'm keen after, we get off this roundtable to have a look at those tackles for a loss and where they stacked up. Tony, Andrew brought up an interesting point there around, a DUI charge. And we know that the Steelers have looked to shift in the last few years in terms of really that character that certain players, bring to it. Is that an issue you think with him, or is this something that, it's a non-issue, DUI is DUI, people move on, does anything stand out there for you?
Well, I mean, when you factor, when you combine that with Pickens, not that he was arrested, but I guess he comes with some character trait issues, being suspended at Georgia. This is something they've gotten away from the last 5 or 6 drafts. Really, they've been going after the high character guys, the team captain, those kind of players from college. So it's interesting to see that they've gone away from that with these last 2 picks. If it's going to be a problem moving forward, I don't know. It's hard to say. It literally just happened, right? You said in December, Andrew, or like late last year.
It was December.
Yeah, so it's something that that might be one of the reasons why he slid so far too. But it's definitely a concern. I mean, something like getting suspended for fighting on the field, that's but a DUI, that's a pretty big deal. So it could be something that they have to keep an eye on.
And then, Jeremy, the thing that, a lot of Steeler fans, we sit there and Tony brought up Terrell Edmunds earlier. And, when Terrell Edmunds was taken where he was taken, like technically, statistically, from what I've looked at, he's met the criteria to be, an average, first round safety over the last decade. But everyone hated where it was picked. And there's often that phrase that we talk about at BTSC where if it was picked in the second or the third, people would, love the pick. We look at a guy like DeMarvin Leal and how he's slipped down, and we've got him in the 84th pick in the draft, like the back end of the third. Is this a pick that we can look back on that maybe we all would have definitely hated in the first round, but maybe in 2 or 3 years we sit there and like, yeah, that was a steal in the third round?
Absolutely. If he plays to the potential that a lot of scouts and national pundits think that he could, I think you definitely can come to that conclusion down the road. I think it's about right as I sit here today, looking at the player, the position, some of the guys that were there too. I think he holds similar value to some of the guys in the secondary that may have been on the docket as well for the Steelers to go after. I liked a couple prospects maybe a little bit better.
Yeah,
that's me personally. But I've gotten to where I really just trust this Steelers team to take some of these guys and make it work. And I think if he'd have gone in the second round to Pittsburgh, I think you're like, ooh, maybe that's a little bit of a stretch. If he went in the first round, you're really thinking that. But here in the third round is kind of his sweet spot to me from the very beginning when I first, got to know DeMarvin Leal a little bit more based on the scouting profiles that were out there and watching some tape. Sweet spot for me was third or fourth round, maybe early second, so I like the spot. I really do.
So then my follow-up question to that one for you is more of a joking question. Are you expecting Colbert to come out and say this is another third-round pick that they had a first-round grade on?
You know what? I wouldn't be surprised. Colbert always talks up his draft pick, maybe a little more than he should, but excuse me. I think the Steelers identified the positions of need, and they are drafting based on that. BPA, best player available at a position of need. That's been their MO, despite their kind of backlash to that thought process.
Yeah, and so that leads really well, I guess, Andrew, into what your usual co-host Betz has done there. That leads into my question for you: is where do the Steelers pick from here? Where do you think they need to go now, rounds 4 through 7, or at least definitely next round in round 4? Where do they target? What position? Or is there a player?
Corner is a screaming need still, in my opinion. Ahkello Witherspoon, whenever he's been asked to be a number one corner, it has not worked out at all. You do not want to be number one corner. Now, you're not going to get a number one corner in the 4th round of the draft, or at least ideally, you can't expect that. But I still believe the Steelers need a slot corner. I've never been a big fan of Arthur Millette. I still believe I know Sutton can play in the slot. Levi Wallace can play in the slot. But ideally, you want to add somebody else. There's still several really good slot corners. My guy, Jack Jones, from Arizona State, a guy I really like. Jacoby Durant, who I mentioned, I believe, on the last roundtable in the second round, is a guy who the Steelers could target in the third. If he's still there in the fourth, he's another guy. There's one guy in the later rounds, Marcel Dabo from Germany.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. He's a guy who's really started to rise boards at the end of the pre-draft process. Got him, Deron Bland. I mean, there's so many names at corner. Daryl Baker Jr., the guy we interviewed, who I would love to see in black and gold. But it's going to be interesting to see. I think the Steelers have to come away with a corner soon. But in the fourth round, I said that's the sweet spot for the Steelers to get a tackle because they don't – I mean, all you have right now is Joe Haig, Dan Moore, and Chukwuma Okorafor. I don't see Okorafor as a starter, but obviously the Steelers do, and I knew that going in. That's why I didn't mock a tackle any higher. But in the fourth round, you have a lot of guys. Rasheed Walker makes a lot of sense. Max Mitchell would make a lot of sense. Kellen Deesh, if he's still there. I don't think the Steelers go after
Matt, let's go.
I don't know if the Steelers go like for a small school guy like that, but I would prefer that over those other guys that I had mentioned. But there's plenty of names. Braxton Jones. I mean,
there's guys like there's Cordell Volson's out there. I don't think Rosenthal's been picked yet out of Kentucky. And he's someone that went really far up apparently in scouts books. In the last sort of month or so of the draft. Again, like cornerbacks. We've talked about off air before. He's sitting there in the seventh apparently, but Mikael Wright. There's a Josh Jobe out of Alabama. I don't think he's getting nearly enough love. There's been a lot of chat. There's been a lot of chat in the live chat around, a safety. So I don't know whether Nick Cross has been picked while we've been on air. But that leads us to our super chat from Snowman. He likes to throw super chats on Touchdown Under, which, as around this time or a bit earlier. And then usually it's followed by Tony Defeo. So Tony, Snowman's asked, will the Steelers draft a running back or will they keep what they have? I think a lot of us would like to see the Steelers draft a running back. Like names to me stick out. Like a Damon Pierce, although I don't know whether he's been picked as well today, a Pierre Strong Jr. Do you think the Steelers will go get a running back in the draft or just see who falls to them as an undrafted free agent?
I think they might. It's funny. They have, you would think the players they have there, Benny and Anthony McFarland, that would be enough, based on because a couple of years ago, number 24, he was people were talking about him replacing James Conner after that week 1 game against the Giants. Now all of a sudden they don't have any depth. So I don't know. I mean, they're probably going to bring somebody in, but they don't necessarily have to draft anybody. I think they can sign somebody as an undrafted free agent. Like they always say, you can get that's the popular saying now. You can get a running back anywhere. So I don't think they necessarily have to draft somebody. I think they can find somebody in the first wave of the undrafted free agents after the draft is over.
Yeah.
Breaking news.
Yeah. Go.
Fourth quarterback is off the board. Andrew, I think you saw it same time as me. Who was it?
Matt Corral, my QB6, almost QB7. But Carolina, I guess that silences the Baker Mayfield rumors.
Yeah. Yeah, it gives them. It's interesting. It's going to be an interesting change for what they're doing right now as well. The question I was going to ask you next, though, Jeremy, was linebackers still there, right? Now we've seen Jacksonville take 2 fairly highly touted, linebackers there, and I think they were the ones that took Lloyd, and then they took Chad Muma as well. The Steelers going and get a linebacker next. Maybe it's not Nick Cross, the safety. Is that? I know we've talked about cornerback, but is it linebacker? We don't know what we're going to get out of Buddy Johnson.
Right, absolutely. I think right now you're looking at stylistically at linebacker who's left when they come back on the board on the clock tomorrow afternoon. If it's a long, rangy guy with some flexibility to rush the passer and also drop back in coverage, I think you've got that as an option for the Steelers. Tomlin and now Flores being on the staff, they love their linebackers, right? Yeah. The Pittsburgh Steelers defense is never right unless there is a stud middle linebacker on the field. And I think they thought they had it in Devin Bush. The injury kind of slowed down that. We'll see how that goes. Miles Jack, maybe he could become that in Pittsburgh. He's still pretty young, but the draft, a young uber athlete, he's got to be on the table, I think. But I think you do have more pressing needs, cornerback, safety even. And then I think I wouldn't be surprised if they double dip at wide receiver too, with what they have on the roster. So it's definitely an option, but I don't know if I'd put it in the top couple things that they'll be looking for in round 4.
There's a lot of prospects still on the board that were, fairly highly rated. And, we talked a little bit about tackle, corner, linebacker, safety, double dipping on wide receiver. Do the Steelers, there's a big gap between 138 and then I think the next pick's 208. Do the Steelers move up in the 4th? Do they, trade back into the 5th using a pick next year? People trade Mason if there's anything there for him, even to get something in the 6th. I think they've got enough in the 7th. I want to throw it open to the full panel. A, do you think the Steelers do need to move up given some of the prospects on the board? And then B, do you think they will?
I'm going to go with they don't move. I think they're going to put where they're at. The only trade I would have liked to see was potentially in this 3rd round here, maybe moving back a little bit and picking up a 5th rounder. But moving up for somebody, excuse me, unless they really like one of these 4th round cornerbacks, these early day 3 cornerbacks, I think they stay put.
Andrew?
I agree. What made this pick hurt more was that Marcus Jones and Malik Willis both went off the board right after that. Not only would Jones been a perfect replacement for Mike Hilton, and then Malik Willis, I mean, could you imagine if we were talking 2 weeks ago and we were saying that Malik Willis wouldn't even just be there in the 2nd round, but would be there in the 3rd round, and the Steelers not take them? Could you imagine the possibilities with that draft? I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, teams are going to look back in this draft 5 years from now and look how foolish they were. I don't care how much of a Mel Kiper rant this sounds like. I do not care one bit. This is a ridiculous mistake that the league is making. Malik is going to show some people wrong. And even though Tennessee may not be the perfect fit, I like the fact that he's going to be able to sit immediately. He's going to come in motivated. A lot of teams made a lot of mistakes. The Titans won this draft just based off that pick.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. I have many questions on whether you can throw down the middle of the field, but we'll see. We'll see. Time will tell. Time will tell. Tony, same question for you. Do you think they need to move up, or is there a position that you do you even trade back in to get a 5th round pick? 70 picks is a lot of picks. That's a third of the draft almost that they're going to sit there and not do anything.
I can't follow Andrew like that. That's unfair to ask me to. He sounds like he knows what he's talking about. I don't. But no, I think there's definitely a possibility that they can. When you say 70 picks in between their last pick and their next pick, that's a huge gap. So yeah, I could definitely see them doing that. They did it last year when they moved up. They lost a pick when they traded for Loudermilk, but I could see them doing that. But I actually have a question about their last year's draft. Trey Norwood. I know because you guys you're mentioning your concerns in the secondary, and Trey Norwood's the Swiss Army knife. And I remember he played a lot of slot early on. I can't remember if he did the rest of the year, but do you think he's a candidate maybe who can step up? And because they like him a lot, they like his intelligence, his football acumen. Do you think he's a candidate to possibly play the slot if the other guys can't step up and do that?
I think his athleticism, his lack thereof, makes him a better projection at safety. He really lives and thrives off his instincts and his instincts only. I think he's better at free safety, but I think we need to hand the tissue box from me to Jeremy, his boy,
Nick Cross.
Nick Cross is a Colt.
Is an Indianapolis Colt.
Yeah. Well, let me say this: they got a missile on the back end, and I would have rather seen Nick Cross over Leal in the 3rd round, but the Steelers locked in their guy in Edmonds, I think, for this year, and they're hoping to find something else for next year. So, the one thing I'd like to point out about the safety part, since we're on that real quick, is that Tyrann Mathieu still out there. They paid nothing for Terrell Edmonds. I don't know if that's off the board yet, that they go out and upgrade that position or add another piece to it. It's not out of the question in my opinion, because what do you do after this year at safety if you haven't taken one yet in this draft? And are you planning to start a rookie next year?
Well, I agree with you though, because if you look at it as well, where the safeties have been taken in this draft, right? Like now, yes, you saw Lewis Seen, you saw Kyle Hamilton, we saw Daxton Hill in the first, but I kind of put Daxton Hill in a little bit of a different bracket because it's more of that free safety, got that adaptability over to, cornerback. So you sit there and you look at where safeties have been drafted and some good safeties, and it's been late. Like the safety market has really taken a drop. Like how much can Matthew really charge a team, after this in this second round of free agency? And so I think you're right there. Maybe that door is still open.
We're going to make Jeff mad talking about Tyrann Mathieu again. He thought it was over. So we might need to watch ourselves.
Well, like there's three of us here that are pretty disappointed. I think I would have to say, and I did want to bring it up purely as well because the rate, it is in the division, but, I was pretty disappointed. And I know a lot of BTSC listeners are going to be disappointed just from the feedback. Travis Jones going over to the Ravens 8 picks before we picked, DeMarvin Leal. Like, you got to sit there. If he'd been there at 84, is he someone that we picked when we look at who they chose and where they chose to go? As we say, they didn't go somewhere like a Perry and Winfrey. So it is pretty interesting. Overall, though, wrap up this pick. I'd love to grade the pick, A to F. Tony, what grade do you give this pick of DeMarvin Leal?
This of the three, this is the one I don't have much of a feel for because I don't know a whole lot about him. So I'm going to say, based on the need and perhaps his potential, because of he seems to be all over the place as far as where he should have been drafted, I'd say a C.
Yeah, Jeremy.
I'm going to go a little higher than that. I'm going to go with a B because I think where he could have been selected by another team, especially early in the thought process of the draft, I think they did a good job getting him in the third. Not a lot of athletic upside, but definitely a guy who provides steady performance and a guy that they can use his versatility. So I give him a B for that.
Andrew, does he get above a D for you?
I'm not going to leave the fact that Malik Willis was still on the board and put in consideration for this pick, though I will say that is going to affect my Kenny Pickett grade a lot. The fact that the Steelers could have gotten Willis 2 rounds later, that one's going to get a failing grade. But nonetheless, I digress. For this pick, I'm going to go C+. We passed on Marcus Jones. Looking at who else was available, there were several good linemen available. Dylan Parham. Just looking at who we passed up on, who we had a chance to get, I think there were better options out there, especially for what we needed. And, I mean, the Steelers know the two-hit situation more than I do, and I'll defer to them on that. But it seemed like everyone is saying that he wants, that both sides want to, him to come back and him to play. So if that's the case, this pick wouldn't make sense. So I think a lot depends on if Tuitt comes back, can the Steelers get signed for him in a trade? And, what else is going to happen with that? But C+.
Yeah, I'm gonna go pretty close to what you guys were saying there. I'm gonna go a B-. I think we address a need there. We get younger. We've got sort of a safety net depending on Tuitt or Alualu. I think with the way we're going to play Leal, right? And I think you can't have enough depth there. I don't think the Davis brothers has shown enough. Wormley, we're probably going to use more of that, defensive end position. So, but yeah, I'll flick over to you, Tony. You put your hand up there.
Oh no, I mean, as far as Leal, I mean, even if Tuitt comes back and he's the old Tuitt again, and same with Alualu. I mean, they rotate their defensive linemen all the time. If he's a valuable rookie and he contributes, I mean, I think that'd be worth something, even if he's not a starter. I think if you're grooming him to be a replacement for Tuitt or Hayward, and I think he could still contribute heavily, or at least close to that in his rookie year. You remember Hargrave and those guys, they contributed a good bit in 2016. So, I mean, even as a backup, I mean, a 3rd round pick, I know Kevin Colbert said, you want to find 3 starters, but you don't have to necessarily find them right away. I mean, I think some of that's for the future too.
Yep.
Yeah, correct. And I think as for me, like, rotating, guys are playing 17 games now, rotating those guys around. We know the sort of ball that's played in the AFC North. Mark and I, I'm touching on it regularly, talk about the need to make sure that we, the Steelers look at spelling, Hayward and Tuitt and TJ Watt and all the rest of it. But I think with that wraps up this third round draft pick roundtable for 2022. I'd like to thank my co-hosts and thank all the BTSC listeners for tuning into this live YouTube show and Facebook show. And then, if you're catching on the audio side, continue to stay with BTSC. We are your non-stop shop for everything Pittsburgh Steelers when it comes to this draft, post-draft analysis, and obviously carrying you right through the NFL season. But yeah, enjoy the rest of the drafts through rounds 4 to 7.
Let's go Steelers.